For more, let's bring in former Pentagon official Michael Maloof. Thank you so much for joining us today, Michael. Now, does it appear to you that U.S. forces in Syria, they were somehow implicated in the transfer from Raqqa, Syria last October, where 3,000 refugees, which reportedly included some 300 heavily fighters?
Well, the U.S. Is supposed to be working with the Kurds in that area. They comprise most of the Syrian Democratic Forces that was in the vanguard of taking back Raqqa. Question is, what was the U.S. role in monitoring the 3,000 refugees that were allowed to leave, and then trying to screen the some 300 or 294 ISIS fighters that were heavily armed, reportedly? That is a good question, because they shouldn't be doing that. Now, was this some kind of a deal that the United States has made with the Kurds? Because the Kurds, they have intentions ultimately of building, the U.S. building a base in the Kurdish-controlled region of Syria. That's open to question, and that's a possibility. So, but these guys were allowed to leave. There's some 300 of them, and they're going to be able to fight another day. The concern is where they're located. They probably were headed south, probably toward, concerned about the possibility of a buildup of ISIS forces.
Now, is the U.S. explanation of leaving such exchanges, rather, with local forces, in this case the local tribal council, and like you said, the Kurdish-dominated Syrian Democratic Forces, is this sufficient?
No, it's not sufficient at all. They should be doing much more monitoring. After all, it's the U.S. goal in being in Syria in the first place to defeat ISIS. You don't let them loose. Now, the Kurds and ISIS fighters are all Sunnis too. So, and there's illusions, I think, of trying to keep the Sunnis somehow united, and particularly toward Iraq, and also to work with the Kurds. And of course, this has inflamed the Turks. The Turks are very concerned about this. They have complained that we're aiding terrorists, and outwardly it looks that way. But you got to keep in mind that Turkey is not all clean in all this. They allowed Al-Qaeda fighters to leave Aleppo to join in Idlib last year, and they're all declared as terrorists as well. So it depends upon your perspective and your narrative. Who is the terrorist of the day? I'm
interested to see how this squares with comments by U.S. forces that they are there to destroy ISIS, like you're saying, if they did nothing to stop these ISIS fighters from fleeing.
Well, you see, we were not on the ground, so it's hard to tell if they were involved in any vetting of any kind of intelligence, whether the Kurds had let the U.S. forces in either before the fact or after the fact. Again, we were not there, so it's hard to say what precisely happened. I doubt seriously there will be any investigation of this, and even if there were, we're never going to hear the end of this. It happened in October, after all, and we know that and ISIS has a tendency, the fighters, to blend in. They'll dress up as civilians and blend in and look innocent and what have you, except those that are carrying heavy weapons, which stands out a little bit. But even that, the question is, why were they allowed to carry in heavy weapons? And that's unknown, because the Pentagon hasn't responded to that.
All right, now, you mentioned earlier you were talking about Turkey, but what do you think, rather, of Turkey criticizing the U.S. for letting the ISIS fighters escape Raqqa, reportedly with their heavy weapons, and doing so in cooperation with the Kurds, who Ankara has labeled as terrorists, and thereby aiding and abetting other terrorists?
Well, again, this is Turkey calling people they don't like terrorists, and the U.S. calling people they don't like terrorists. And it's, you know, as I said earlier, Turkey allowed Al-Qaeda to escape with families, with weapons, into Idlib, where they're all concentrated now, which is creating yet even further problems. And it also could generate a potential for a stronger Al-Qaeda as a result of the evacuation of the ISIS fighters. That's a strong possibility. However, the fact that we have the U.S. is supporting the Kurds, they're the only ones who are the frontline fighters so far against ISIS, and Turkey has declared them all to be terrorists. But in fact, they have been doing the fighting for ISIS, which is U.S. mission, the U.S. goal. But in this case, something fell through the cracks, and there should have been greater administration. Now, the Pentagon's argument is, well, we allow the local council and the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, to screen and what have you. Well, they didn't do a good job. So this should be incumbent upon the Pentagon to make sure this never happens again.
Here we have probably about 30 seconds left. In short, what do you think the U.S. should do in the time being?
Well, the United States is going to have to work, if it's defeated ISIS, the question is, what's going to be their role in Syria in the future? Should they even be there? Congress hasn't approved it. If ISIS is, quote, defeated in Syria, they should get out unless, and I know that they have ulterior motives now, and that is to set up that base and ultimately to try and control that area that has allowed the Kurds to come in and also control the oil fields up around Mosul.
We're going to leave it right there. Thank you so much for your insight. That was former Pentagon official Michael Maloof. Thank you so much.
Thank you.